Eden-Monaro, call them out. Demand the truth, dispel the doubt. For governments must serve the land, not crush its people with sleight of hand.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Wade Cox, who is running as a federal candidate for the Eden-Monaro in the upcoming election. Wade brings with him decades of leadership within the Christian Churches of God and a bold vision shaped by biblical prophecy, national sovereignty, and a deep concern for the direction of this country. We're looking forward to hearing more about his platform, his perspective on Australia's future, and what sets him apart in this race. Welcome, Wade.
Welcome. Thank you, Chris.
It's a pleasure to have you. Can you share a little bit about your background, where you're from, and how you became involved in public leadership in the Eden-Monaro?
Well, I was in the army. I had been seriously wounded in Vietnam, and I carried a lot of injuries and disability. I went into farming, and perhaps that might not have been the wisest choice, but I loved farming and I loved the grazing, that is, I loved cattle and animal husbandry. So I went into that because while I was in the army, I bought a cattle station at Toganogra, which is between Braidwood and the Kawarri Valley on the Cooma Road. Now, I then expanded into the Carnunas cattle station. I bought Carnunas. Carnunas means the house of Jonah, actually, which was an ironic name, but I then spent 10 years there in Eden-Monaro, and my family had in fact come from Eden-Monaro. My mother's family came to Eden-Monaro in 1832, worked for Dr. Reed on his northern property at Braidwood, and so we felt an affinity for the country. That's why I went there. And then we had problems where these liberals pushed the interest rates up to 23.2%, and in agriculture you just can't pay 23.2%. So we had to sell and retire. My injuries got much worse after I turned 40. And so I went to university. I got myself qualified in philosophy, religious studies. I brushed up in my Indonesian as a sub-major in ANU, and then I did a Master of Letters in philosophy of religion and ethics at the UNE. So I got 3 degrees. I did graduate diploma of public law at UNE. So I have 3 degrees. And I specialised then in ancient religions, that is, Judeo-Christianity and Islam, based on the history of the scriptures. Now, I've written thousands of academic papers on religious studies. I've written a commentary on the Quran, which is now accessed worldwide. I'm considered a world authority on early Islam and a world authority on early Judeo-Christianity. So my view, given the fact of my family history, in that my 48th great-grandmother was the cousin of the Christ, and my 49th great-grandmother was the cousin of the Virgin Mariam, and Joseph of Arimathea was my 50th great-grandfather, that they intermarried with the British princes, and I'm descended from them through Rhys ap Griffith, last king of Jehobath and Prince of South Wales. So that gave me an intense interest as I researched the church history and also my own family history. I'm the 90th great-grandson of King David.
So would you say that your life experience, your academia, and perhaps your lineage has motivated you to step into the political arena?
When it gives me concern for this country. This is my country. My ancestors arrived here, my mother's ancestors arrived here on the the 26th of January 1788, and they were married on the 17th of February 1788 by order of Governor Phillip. And my families settled from Sydney all the way down through the Victorian border and beyond. So my whole life history, I'm a 7th generation Australian. My life is dedicated to this country. I've been wounded in battle, serving this country, and I've served, and I know what the problems are with the Defence Force and what these globalists are doing to this country. They're deliberately destroying our defence capacity, our manufacturing capacity, our industrial capacity. They're destroying our power grids. They're destroying our system, our health systems. They're using COVID vaccines, and there's a lot more to come. I've written papers on this many years ago, explaining what they were going to do with these viruses. And they are trying to destroy the world and limit population. That's got to be stopped, and that's why I'm running for Parliament. Clive Palmer asked me to do it 11 odd years ago at a meeting in Canberra. He said, you've got to run for Parliament so we can clean this place up.
That's probably the most fiery introduction we've had so far. I love it. Why do you believe Australian society, or do you believe Australian society is in decline regardless of whichever political party wins?
Oh, yes. Well, we're controlled by the globalists. We've done away with the laws of God. We think that we know better than God, and we think we're going to go on forever sinning like we are, and we're not. Christ will be here probably between 2028 and 2030. The witnesses will be here 3.5 years earlier than Christ, and they're going to start dealing with us.
Do you think you'll turn people off your message by mentioning Jesus and prophecy?
I was set aside under the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 4, verses 15 to 27, to warn the nations of the coming of the Messiah in the last days. That's my job. If I don't do it, I'll pay the price. I don't really mind if nobody likes it.
I love where you're going, Wade. You seem to be a man on a mission.
Yes, I have a job to do.
And what would that job be?
That's warning the nations of the coming of the Messiah and building the church in the last days, the Philadelphian system in Revelation chapter 3, verse 7 to 13.
I would say you're like a man crying out in the wilderness.
Yes, well, there's a lot of people and a lot of prophecies concerning this, which they've now taken. The Catholics wrote prophecies about what we are to do. This Christian Churches of God in the last days is the Philadelphia era. We were warned about. They said we were going to be an iconoclastic Sabbatarian system in the last days. And they said this in the 1400s. They said we would come from an Israelite country to the east of Jerusalem between two seas. That's Australia or New Zealand. There can't be anyone else. That's us.
And for those listening in the future, what's remarkable is that the Pope recently just passed away.
Yes, we issued the paper, The Last Pope Part 2, and released it. We will be issuing it to the public on the new moon, that new moon of the second month ER. And that is Monday, the 28th, Tuesday. It will be out publicly.
So how has the abandonment of biblical principles contributed to the problem Australia faces today?
Well, we've done away with God's law, haven't we? We've decided that we know better. We've started many centuries ago when my family started the church in Britain, and it was my family. My 48th grandfather gave the 12 hides of land for establishment of the church in 40 CE, or around 40 CE, at Glastonbury, to his grandfather-in-law Joseph of Arimathea, and to his nephew, Linus up Caradog. Linus was ordained by Christ and appointed the first bishop of Rome. It was my family that sent the first bishop of Rome under instructions from Jesus Christ to start the Christian church in Rome. Aristobulus, also ordained with Linus by Christ, was sent to Britain, and he built the first church in Britain on land my family provided. Now, we helped the structure because Avi Ruggs' wife was a cousin of the Christ, and that's why he used our family. All of that, we were keeping Sabbaths, new moons, holidays, food laws. We were quartodecimals, all the way from 40 CE right up to 663 at the Synod of Whitby. In 597, the King of the Angles, Ethelbert's wife, who was a French princess, now Queen of the Angles, wrote to Rome, asked the Pope to send a Catholic bishop, because there were no Trinitarians in England in 597. So he got there. They sent Augustine, later of Canterbury, to Britain, and then they baptised, when I say baptised, they sprinkled 10,000 Angles at the midwinter fires in Kent. And they then established the Trinitarian Church. Up until then, it didn't exist in Britain. That's why I'm trying now to get people to look at their roots and look at the British people right through, not just the Welsh. It wasn't them, it was the whole British people all the way up through to the Scots, who didn't come in until 500 AD. They weren't in Britain until 500 AD.
Bringing it back to today, what would be some of the biblical principles that you think have been abandoned?
Oh, they killed their children and passed their children to the fire to Moloch. Now, God forbids that.
For those that don't understand that reference of passing children through the fire of Moloch, what is that specifically?
Well, abortion and infanticide is now rife here. People think that there's nothing wrong with it. It's murder. It's the murder of our children, and that's got to be stopped.
What would you say to your constituents that would say that it's a woman's choice?
Well, I'm afraid it's not a woman's choice. The Bible is quite specific. The law of God says you may not pass your children through the fire to Moloch. You may not kill your children unless it's to save the life of the mother. That is the only grounds permissible for abortion.
And would you say that the blood of the innocents cries from the ground?
Yes, the blood of the innocents is crying from the ground. Look at America. It's going to get thumped in this coming war. The war will start between now and 2020 and 2026. We will have World War III.
Which war specifically? Between which parties?
Which parties? Well, what you'll see is the war will erupt from the Middle East. You'll see Iran is trying, and its proxies are trying to eradicate Israel. That's not going to happen. You've only got to read the Bible text talking about Purim. In the last days, they tried to wipe out Israel under Haman the Agagite. And that's covered in Esther, and we have covered a commentary on that, and then Esther, Purim in the last days. That's important. Now what's going to happen is they're going to try and attack Israel. These idiots running around here in Melbourne and Sydney waving Palestinian flags and crying for the destruction of Israel will be put to one side, and we'll deal with them after. This war will initiate. There will be then, under Daniel chapter 11 verses 40 to 45, will come in. There'll be a revolution in Europe, It's going to the right. They're going to start killing these Davos, WEF globalists, and they're going to clean them out of Britain. They're going to clean them out of Europe, and they will then go into the Middle East. That war will be the war of the sixth trumpet in Revelation. We're in the war of the fifth trumpet because we've started all these biochemical warfare additives in these viruses, and there are heaps of them still to come.
Okay, so we've touched on the topic of abortion. Were there any other biblical principles that you think Australia has abandoned today?
Oh, the application of our criminal justice system. It's a joke. These magistrates in Victoria particularly are letting people, these criminals, out of jails without any punishment properly. There's no rigorous dealing with any criminal activity. Our own political system and our police force will not stop the drugs and the murders and the destruction of our youth. And it's just not good enough.
Could you provide examples of any of that?
Well, you've only got to look at the amount of hardcore drugs being distributed in this country. And it's when I was in council down here in Talaganda, Braidwood, there were drugs being grown by the Griffith Mafia with the knowledge of the police. And it was being grown down at the Wareye when I was the president of Talaganda Shire. Now, don't tell me they didn't know that the entire drug system in Australia and in New South Wales is run by with the knowledge of the police and the political structure. And it's got to be stamped out.
That's a huge claim. Just to confirm, you believe that a lot of these drug operations are done with the knowledge of the police?
Well, certainly the tacit consent.
And I just want to check something else. You said you were in council before, is that right?
Yes.
Which council was that?
Talaganda.
And how long?
6 years.
And you were a councillor there?
Yes.
And
I was a councillor, I was deputy president, and I was shire president.
And have a lot of those issues that region faced been resolved by this time?
No. They were deliberately trying to stop the tarring of the road from Braidwood to Cooma. Deliberately. Because they didn't want traffic through there, because the wealthy landowners, some of them, were more than happy just to see everyone else travelling on gravel roads, so they didn't get any through traffic, tourism or anything like that. None of those nasty things.
Now, you mentioned before that the influence of the globalist movements such as Davos and the United Nations and the WEF,
Yep.
how do you see them impacting Australia specifically today?
Well, they've managed to fund Big Pharma, and they are bribing the politicians in the American system and the world system. It's not just here. They're bribing them to turn a blind eye and enforce these COVID vaccines, enforce these lockdowns, and it's only the start of it. They intend to continue this until they have world control under the empire of the beast, which is covered in the book of Revelation quite clearly, and the empire of the beast will take over and it will destroy what the world sees as the Christian church. The Trinitarian church system will be totally annihilated by the beast system by 2027. And that was just published 2 months ago by the Roman Catholic Church using the prophecies of Sextus V as the axis of the midpoint of Malachi's prophecies.
Now, if you got in, how would you prevent any of this from happening?
Well, we've got to firstly get our defence force mobilised. We've got to start getting them. We've got to reconstitute the War Reserve, which was abolished years ago. We told them that the war reserve had been breached. Ray Leroy and I told these guys that the war reserve had been breached. We didn't have enough ammunition. We had only enough 50 cal ammunition to run one day's operations on a general scale. The solution was to abolish the war reserve. If you haven't got a war reserve, you don't have a problem, do you? That's what they did. And that's how serious it is.
And so, if you were put in charge, how would you resolve that problem?
Oh, first thing, organise the reconstitution of the war reserve, put the Lithgow small arms into full production, give a fund them until we had enough ammunition to fight a war. And we don't at the moment, and we're in real trouble.
Do you think we're lacking a lot of the key expertise required to make, let's say, modern warfare?
Oh, we don't have enough soldiers. They just dismissed the recruiting drives because they couldn't recruit enough people. So they said they did away with the recruiting. That's under this government, but it was as bad under the Liberals. They're both two sides of the same coin.
How would you resolve the recruitment problem?
Well, first of all, I'd look at creating a corps of engineers. And the Corps of Engineers would solve two problems. It would create engineers trained to fight as infantry. It would train them then to be field engineers and then create construction companies and battalions and units. And I'd use the construction companies to build cities inland, because we are going to lose a lot of this stuff on the coast through the rise of global warming and the sea levels, and we'll talk about that next. But the structure of the corps, for instance, I and a couple of colonels and a political operative wrote a paper on defence and submitted to Defence. It had fairly sensitive information in it, but the fact was they said they'd put it in the white paper, the Defence white paper, and they issued a Defence white paper, but it didn't deal with the problems we told them, the serious problems. We told them to go and buy the Virginia-class submarines 11 years ago. If they hadn't done that, they'd be on station now. They didn't do that. Now, it's too late. The war will have occurred before we even see them. And these guys will be in real trouble.
And this war you speak of, what will be the two sides? Some would say that the war's already started between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, it will expand from the Middle East into Russia and Europe, and then into China. And China will invade Taiwan, and the war will be in the South China Sea and through Southeast Asia. And there is no getting away from it. China's already prepared for this war. I had reports. I run an worldwide organisation. I get reports from all around the world about what's happening. China has, on the Yangtze and on the Yellow River basin, all of the rivers on the coast are chock-a-block with naval craft with covers all over the armaments, so you can't see them, but they're all there. You can't miss the ships.
Do you believe the future war will go nuclear?
Yes, of course it will. It has to go nuclear because Revelation chapter 9 verse 18 says a third of the world will be killed in that war. Now, Medvedev from Russia said that this war we are forcing now is Revelation 9:18. Medvedev said it himself, and he said, you'll kill a third of mankind with what you're doing. And he was right. We will see a third of mankind dead with that, and these viruses, these vaxes, mRNA poisons, which are nanoparticles, will kill off 25%. The Bible's clear on what's going to happen.
This isn't in the list of questions I have, but it's just too interesting not to ask. Do you believe Australia will be struck with nuclear weapons?
Yes. Yes, they'll do it on a number of ways. They'll strike us with long-range missiles, but they'll also simply put in container ships and put nuclear weapons in the container ships, and they'll blow up Sydney and Melbourne, and they'll blow up Brisbane, and there's your three capital cities gone. Adelaide they'll do the same, and they'll get it. Perth. You only need 5 nukes and you can destroy the major city complexes in Australia. These people are fools. They don't understand what they're doing. Well, I suspect they do understand, and they're working for the globalists to destroy us and hand us over to the Chinese. The leaders think that they're going to run Australia under the Chinese. Sorry. The Chinese are going to take them out because they betrayed their own people, and they're going to shoot everyone in Parliament. That's what the Chinese are going to do. And we're going to be treated like the Uyghurs are. If you think the Uyghurs are any better off than we'll be, you're an idiot.
And occupation, do you think Australia will be occupied during that time?
Yes, has to be.
By which specific nation?
Oh, first of all, we'll have to call on the Americans, who will come in and occupy the north. Then we'll fight wars in the north, and the Chinese will try and invade us in the north with the help of the Russians. This is not going to be a pretty game, and these people in Sydney and Melbourne are voting for teals and greenies. They think they might survive, and they won't. They'll be put to the sword, a lot of them. And they'll be eating each other before this is finished. I'm saying things that the Bible is saying, and God is going to deal with them.
No, I appreciate your very open thoughts, Wade. I do. You spoke about violations of the Nuremberg Code regarding COVID. What breaches do you believe occurred during that time?
There are 10 sections of the Nuremberg Code. I wrote to Hunt when he was Minister for Health. I told him how he breached the Nuremberg Code. I gave him 9 examples, and the 10th is possible. That was the second breach, the breach of the second level. I told him he probably breached them as well. So I think they breached the whole 10 items. I wrote to the Human Rights Commissioner, and he said that they didn't have to bother with the Nuremberg Code. It didn't apply to Australia.
You've described the major parties as a uniparty. Can you define what you believe uniparty to mean?
Well, they say that they have 2 different sets of principles and 2 different objectives. One purports to be looking after the workers, while the other purports to be looking after the manufacturers, the industrialists, and the people, the small businessmen. Now, they claim they're looking after small businessmen. Both of them say, oh, well, we've got to do that. And under this COVID scam, they crushed small business, and particularly in Victoria. But in Sydney and Brisbane and around Australia, they deliberately crushed it. You can't trust them. They both carry out the instructions of the World Economic Forum and the globalists of Davos. You can't allow them to continue in government.
Okay, let's suppose I believe you that Liberal, Labour, they're just part of the same bird. Then how about the other minor independent parties, such as the Greens and the Teals?
Well, they're straight out Marxist globalists. That's what they are. And they support the Labor Party, and the Labor Party supports them. They're mutually independent.
And how would you differ from a minor independent party like the Teals or like the Greens?
Well, we're not globalists. That's the big deal. We're not globalists. We're nationalists. And it's the same as America. America's just voted out the most corrupt government the world has ever seen. And everyone's saying, oh, the Democrats weren't that corrupt. Yes, they were that corrupt. And they got $39 trillion in debt they borrowed from the world and won't pay it back. That's where we're at. The US people saw through it, elected Trump, and told him to clean it up, and that's what he's doing, and now they hate him for it. It's a joke.
Now, do you believe that Australia has been betrayed by its politicians?
Yes, of course they have.
Can you be specific? Which politician and how have they betrayed Australia?
It's the globalist movement within the parties. You've got Bowen mouthing all this nonsense about renewable energy, and it's drivel. Global warming is not man-made. It's not caused by coal. Coal's got nothing to do with it. 40 years ago, the globalists decided that by saying that global warming was man-made, because they know it happens every 1100 years. The sequence is that it runs for 100 solar cycles of 11.1 years. At the end of 50 cycles, the warm period collapses into a mini ice age, which runs for another 50 cycles. It then comes back into another global warming phase for another 50 cycles.
So currently, what cycle are we in right now?
We're about to go into the next global warming cycle. We're at the end of the medieval ice age. Now, the medieval ice age started with a vengeance in 1450. The world sea levels dropped 10 feet. Now, that world sea level drop happened significantly at Ephesus and Miletus in Turkey when world sea levels moved out 7 kilometres, and they had to build a new seaport at Kusadasi, 7 kilometres from where the old seaports were at Ephesus and Miletus. Now, everyone understands that. I've been to Turkey with experts. We've made videos on what's happened, what happened then, and what the early cities were all about and how they operated. It's no secret. We know that in 1450, world sea levels dropped 10 feet, and then the islands, some islands appeared in the Pacific. So the Maori moved into New Zealand, and then they pushed the Maori out into the Cook Islands, and the Cook Islands were there because they emerged from the sea after it dropped 10 feet. There were other areas in the Pacific that were occupied by the Polynesians at that time. Now, all of that, when this global warming period occurs in the next 6 years, we're going to see the vials of the wrath of God, because Christ is going to be here and he's going to deal with the world. And the fourth vial of the wrath of God, as you're aware, means that the angel will pour his vial on the sun, and the sun will increase the global warming to a point where people will howl in discomfort. That's biblical structure. And it's going to happen when Christ gets here.
Wow, I'm not quite sure how to follow up onto that. Now, would you propose a tax on mineral resources, and would that help to repair Australia's financial situation?
We're in real trouble. We've got $1 trillion in debt that our kids have got to pay off. And it's been put there by this Labor government, but it wasn't just this Labor government. They only put $300 billion. But the previous government, the Liberals, managed to get it up to 600 or 700 billion.
Right. And what would you do differently to rebuild Australia's manufacturing and defence capabilities?
Well, first of all, I'd introduce the Corps of Engineers straight away. And what we need to do is we need to bring in national service, and we need to do it immediately. But with the Corps of Engineers, we can create a double engineering capacity and an infantry capacity, and we can then divert and train infantry as well, and add to it with recruiting infantry units, and we can use the women in proper ways. Then they're not fit to be in combat positions. They should be used in different ways. We can use them in support organisations, and we can use them in drones because they're very good at fine work. We can make them drone operators and attack drones. So there are many things we can do.
If I understand you correctly, you would recommend using national service personnel to increase Australia's capital infrastructure. Is that right? You would use them, the engineering corps?
Yes, well, we put, basically the Corps of Engineers, we would recruit, train, and we would put in permanent positions, and they would be a permanent structure. We would then be able to get it out of the hands of the developers and the hands of the unions. We could scrap that, bring it over the range, because we can't allow any further development under 60 metres above sea level because of this coming problem. You don't know just how high the sea levels are going to rise. There is 5+ metres on the Greenland cap. There's 5.7 metres plus on the West Antarctic Basin. Both of those have been melted in the last 2,500 years. In the Roman warm period, the West Antarctic Basin was devoid of ice, and it was mapped. We had the maps put into the Library at Alexandria, and that formed, when the Muslims sacked it, they took the maps back to Baghdad, and that formed the Piri-Reis map of 1513 for the Turkish Admiralty. They had all of the Antarctic and South America mapped, and that was 200 BC that was done.
Bringing it back to today, in regards to this engineering corps that you're proposing, wouldn't that require a whole lot of education to take place?
We can do it with the TAFE, and we've got the corps educators in the engineers and the infantry now. We can train, all of the recruit training can be done by the current infantry. The engineer training, corps training, will be done by the engineers.
And wouldn't such a process of education on a mass scale be incredibly expensive?
No, you've got to simply get rid of the 35,000 jobs you created in the public service in Canberra. It'll pay for the lot.
And how would you address the current cost of living concerns, particularly in relation to fuel, taxes, infrastructure spending?
Well, we've got to reduce fuel excise. It's a great imposition, especially now with this escalating cost of living. It's insane. And it's the bureaucrats that are bleeding our people white. They've got to be stopped. And this Labor Party and the Liberals have got to be stopped. We've got to get rid of them.
Would you do anything in regards to immigration and housing?
Yes, it's got to be stopped also. The immigration has to be reduced to what it used to be years ago, not now. We've always had immigration. I'm an immigrant, you're an immigrant. We are, that is, I was born here for 7 generations, but they were all immigrants. There wasn't one in my family that wasn't an immigrant. It's important that we've got immigrants here, but it can't be at the expense of our current population. It's got to be at the development of our population. And we've always been like that, right? I've got a number of nationalities in my bloodstream. Most of them either British or Scandinavian. But there's some of them are refugees. For instance, one of my family, the Guard family, was refugees from France, southern France, after the siege of La Rochelle. They came in because they were persecuted as Protestants.
I believe that was the Huguenots.
Yes, yeah. In fact, the earliest of the Huguenots. They were Sabbatarians.
So if I understand you correctly, you're not for negative immigration or zero immigration. You would just prefer to have sustainable immigration.
Sustainable immigration. But what I am for is the deportation of these activist terrorists, these Muslim priests, sheiks, ayatollahs that are trying to get revolution in this country and do away with our culture. They have to be put in concentration camps and deported.
Wow. No, I appreciate you being so open. You've mentioned the need for inland development. What would be some of the specific projects or ideas that you would champion?
The creation and design of cities inland by the Corps of Engineers, and the creation by, I would get hold of these industrialists, these globalists that are selling our resources overseas. I would force them to build factories in Australia. I would give them free resources if they did that. But then I'd tax anything they sent overseas so that they would pay for the development of what goes on inland.
So you've mentioned these industrialists. Would that include people like Gina Reinhardt, like people like Clive Palmer?
Yes, well, Clive Palmer is advocating exactly that. Clive's saying we're going to tax all the iron ore for $15 a tonne. That's what he thinks. I agree with him. That's what we've got to do. And we've got to take this gas that Gina Reinhardt is exporting and reserve it for Australia and put it inland. Make sure all of our core production, electric production, is funded by gas. She needs to do it, and she's not happy about that, but she'll do it all right if we get government.
And how do you propose we reclaim Australia's sovereignty against foreign influence, such as the Chinese?
Well, we haven't lost it yet. If I am successful, we won't lose it. In 1939, these Liberals, under Menzies, it was the United Australia Party then, disgrace on them, said that they would give the north of Australia, north of Brisbane, to the Japs. Now, don't let anyone tell you they didn't say that, they did. And we fired them. And the Labor Party took over under John Curtin and saved Australia. Don't let anyone tell you. But the Labor Party under John Curtin are not these cretins in Canberra now. It's got nothing, they've nothing to do with the old Labor Party of the workers. These people are into the universities and all of these lefty games they're playing. They're globalists and they have to be removed.
But specifically, how would you stop that influence from taking place?
Which influence?
Foreign influence into Australian politics.
Oh, you just make it an imprisonable offence to take funds from anyone overseas. That's simple. You put anyone in jail who takes money from any other source, and that's where America's going to have to go as well, and Britain and everybody else. You put them in jail if they take money from overseas. Anyone who takes money from an overseas source for political purposes should be jailed.
Including the Americans and the British?
Yeah, everybody. If the Americans and the British send you money, well, it's still an overseas organisation and you don't know what games they're playing. Fund your political structure internally and make it totally unimpeachable. Make it honest and punish and imprison the politicians that are not honest. In the old days, we used to bring in the death penalty for treason. That's got to be done again. We've got to reintroduce the death penalty for politicians who betray their country.
Well, let's get on to some of the more interesting topics. A lot of these have been fascinating topics already, but let's get into it. You spoke about 2027 to 2030 being a critical prophetic window. What should Australians be preparing for?
Well, over the next 3 years, from 2025 to 2027, the beast power, the empire of the beast of the last days of Revelation, will take over. They're forming now.
What does that mean when you say the beast will take over?
Well, it will form around and destroy, it will incorporate Russia after this war, and the Russians will just be another part of that system. It will form a system which is against the Babylonian system of Christianity, their so-called Christianity of the Trinitarians. They will be wiped out by 2027.
Who will be wiped out?
The whole of the Trinitarian system will be wiped out. They are saying that themselves now, using the prophecies of Sextus V as the axis of the midpoint of Malachi between Conrad the Roman and Peter the Roman, who is the last pope. That's going to happen over the next 3 years. They say that. They say the end of the world will occur now in 2027. No, it won't. What will occur is the end of the Trinitarian church system. So also the end of the Muslim system. These wars will kill a third of mankind.
So how should Australians be preparing for that, if that were to come to pass?
Well, they have to repent to stay alive in the long run. They've got to turn to God. Repent. Keep the law and the testimony and the temple calendar that runs from the law. Get rid of Christmas and Easter. Get rid of Sunday worship. Get rid of the whole lot. Go back to what Christ told them to do.
Which was?
Which was keep the law and the testimony, keep the Sabbaths and the new moons, and keep the feasts, and keep the food laws, and do what God says.
Do you believe that this end of the age has shaped your political views in a lot of ways?
Oh, the more I study now, the more aware I am of what's happening. I studied the Quran and wrote a commentary on the Quran because it is commentary on the Bible. For instance, Islam is just totally ignorant. They think the name of the prophet was Muhammad, which it wasn't. Muhammad is the name of the church council. The name of the prophet was Qasim. They kept the Sabbaths, the new moons. They kept the temple calendar. They kept the Day of Atonement. And they kept the Day of Atonement on a different day from the Jews, who had introduced Hillel by the time that the Qasim was called and formed. He was a baptized Christian minister.
So how do Australian leaders practically respond to this reality that you're talking about?
Well, they hate it. What they've ignored and lied about the Bible for 1700 years. The English-speaking people have ignored it since the Synod of Whitby in 663. For 1400 years they've lied about what the Bible says. And they stopped hanging us for denying the Trinity in 1649. Now, they were hanging us right up until then because we said there was only one true God, we were Sabbatarians, we were Quarto-Decimants, and we kept the food laws. That was enough to kill us, wasn't it? Of course they should.
So what role does Australia play in this greater biblical narrative that you've been describing?
What role does Australia
play? What role?
Well,
we're not a major power. We're not Israel. What role does
we
Australia
are an Israelite country. The prophets of the Roman Catholic Church in the 1400s said that in the last days, the day-night Antichrist movement would come out of Israel, an Israelite country to the east of Jerusalem between two seas. Now, that day-night Antichrist system refers to Dan Ephraim as the combined nation of Israel in the East, in the Pacific. Now, it's only Israel and New Zealand that can fall into that category. That is, Australia and New Zealand as part of Israel, an Israelite country. Now, they, in the prophecy, said that that system would be a Sabbatarian iconoclast system in the last days, and that they even mentioned its leader and the things that happened to him. Now, they knew that. The demons had to have been in their heads for 600 years previously. So they know, and it's happening now, and that's one of the things. Our job is to do this and warn the nations of the coming of the Messiah. That was our job in Jeremiah chapter 4. It's our job in Revelation 3, 7 to 13. And we are continuing to do that until the witnesses get here. And then we'll be further guided by them.
When will the witnesses arrive?
Sometime between this year and 2020 and 2027.
And they will perform certain miracles or prophecies?
Yes, they will stand on the Temple Mount for 1,260 days. And that's 3.5 years. Now they will prophesy, they will have the power to bring fire from heaven, they will have the power to implement the plagues of Egypt, and they will be able to stop the rain. There will be no rain in due season for the duration of their ministry, except as they dictate. They can allow it to rain, but it will be at their discretion.
And when you refer to the Temple Mount, is that a specific place in Israel, or would that be
exactly
metaphorical?
The Temple Mount in Israel.
From my limited understanding, there is no Temple Mount in Israel right now.
Yes, there is. Oh yeah, I've been on it. I've walked all over it. The Temple Mount's there, and you've got the Dome of the Rock, and you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's on the Temple Mount. Now, they'll be there. And
Doesn't that presume that something's happened to the Dome of the Rock?
They might even destroy it with fire from heaven. You don't know what they're going to do. I'm not going to second guess them. I'll be saying yes sir, no sir, when they get here. One of them will be your and my nth great grandfather. That's Enoch. And he's the father of everyone alive on the planet at the moment. And then the other is Elijah. We've been told in the Malachi 4:5 that it will be Elijah.
So as we wrap things up, why is it critical for people to reject the mainstream political parties and to vote for alternatives such as the Trumpet of Patriots?
Well, because the mainstream political parties are no longer independent Australian political parties. They work for the globalists. They work for the WEF. And they work for these Marxists who are trying to establish the empire of the beast. And they think they're going to get away with it, and they're not.
And what is your message to Australians who feel powerless, discouraged, or overwhelmed by the current state of politics?
Vote. Get off your backsides and vote. Make sure you vote for an independent who's got a fire in his belly or her belly, and put him in Parliament and get rid of these globalists.
Mr. Wade Cox, was there anything else that you'd like to add before we finish up?
No, you've done a pretty good job.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Eden-Monaro, call them out, demand the truth, dispel the doubt, for governance must serve the land, not crush its people with sleight of hand. The worst of crisis left to fester, no justice found, no old redress here. Shame on the gang who turned their backs, shame on this council, mired in cracks. So rise, dear now. of hand.